December 17th, 1939. The temperature had plunged to -40 degrees Celsius in the frozen forests along the Kolar River, deep in the Ladoga-Karelia region of Finland. Dawn would not arrive for several more hours in this land where winter darkness stretched for all but a few precious moments of twilight. Somewhere beneath the snow, invisible against the white landscape, a man lay perfectly still. He had been there since before the first grey hints of light touched the eastern horizon, his breath carefully controlled, a mound of packed snow arranged in front of his position. His rifle, a Finnish-produced Seiko M28/30, rested on that snow pile, its barrel pointed toward a distant tree line where Soviet soldiers would soon emerge. The man was small, barely 160 centimeters tall, wrapped in white winter camouflage that made him indistinguishable from the frozen landscape surrounding him. His name was Simo Häyhä. Within 100 days, he would become the deadliest sniper in recorded military history, and the Soviet soldiers he hunted would give him a name spoken in whispered terror across the entire Eastern Front: Belaya Smrt, the White Death. The story of how a quiet Finnish farmer transformed into a legendary figure of modern warfare begins not in the frozen killing fields of the Winter War, but in the small hamlet of Kiskinen, within the municipality of Rautjärvi, in the Viipuri province of southern Finland. Here, on December 17th, 1905, Simo was born as the seventh of 8 children to Juho and Katriina Häyhä, a Lutheran farming family who worked the unforgiving soil near what would become the Russian border. The landscape of southeastern Finland shaped every aspect of young Simo's character. Dense forests of pine and birch stretched endlessly across terrain that remained frozen for much of the year. Winters brought temperatures that could kill an unprepared man in hours. Survival demanded patience, resilience, and an intimate understanding of the natural world. These qualities would serve Häyhä well in the trials to come. From his earliest years, Simo demonstrated an exceptional aptitude for the rifle. Hunting was not merely a pastime in rural Finland, but a necessity, a means of supplementing the family larder and protecting livestock from wolves and other predators. Young Häyhä spent countless hours in the forests surrounding his home, learning to track game through deep snow, to read the subtle signs of animal movement, and most importantly, to shoot with devastating accuracy. The old bolt-action rifle he carried became an extension of his body, as natural in his hands as a pen in the grip of a scholar. By the time he reached his teenage years, Simo had developed marksmanship abilities that astonished even experienced hunters in the region. His patience was legendary among those who knew him. He could lie motionless for hours, waiting for the perfect shot, his breathing slow and controlled, his mind empty of everything except the target in his iron sights. At 17, Häyhä joined the Suojeluskunta, the Finnish Civil Guard, a voluntary militia organization that would play a crucial role in his development as a marksman. The Civil Guard was no mere social club, but a serious defensive organization born from Finland's turbulent path to independence. After centuries under Swedish and then Russian rule, Finland had declared independence in December 1917, seizing the opportunity presented by the chaos of the Russian Revolution. The young nation immediately faced a brutal civil war, followed by years of tension with its massive Soviet neighbor to the east. The Civil Guard existed precisely because Finnish citizens understood that their independence might one day need defending against overwhelming odds. Within this organization, Häyhä's shooting abilities blossomed into something extraordinary. He won numerous marksmanship competitions throughout the Viipuri province, filling his modest home with trophies. His fellow guardsmen watched in amazement as he consistently outperformed men with far more experience and training. In 1925, at age 19, Häyhä began his 15-month compulsory military service with the Bicycle Battalion 2 in Raivola. Here, the quiet farmer received his first formal military training, attending the non-commissioned officer school and serving as a conscript officer in Bicycle Battalion 1 at Terijoki. His superiors quickly recognized his exceptional abilities with a rifle, yet Häyhä remained humble, preferring to stand at the back of group photographs, avoiding the spotlight that his skills might have attracted. He completed his service with the rank of corporal and returned to his family farm, resuming the quiet life of a Finnish farmer. For the next decade he worked the land, hunted in the forests he knew so intimately, and continued his marksmanship training with the Civil Guard. According to Major Tapio Saarelainen, who would later write extensively about Häyhä's life. The farmer had developed an almost supernatural ability to estimate distances. He could judge the range to a target up to 150 meters away with an accuracy of just 1 meter. During Civil Guard training exercises, he once hit a target 16 times from 150 meters in just 1 minute, an extraordinary achievement with a bolt-action rifle, where each cartridge had to be manually loaded into a fixed 5-round magazine. Häyhä did not receive formal sniper training until 1938 at a training center in Uti. By then, the clouds of war were gathering over Europe. The young nation of Finland, with its population of barely 4 million souls, watched with growing unease as Joseph Stalin consolidated power in Moscow and began casting covetous eyes toward Finnish territory. The Soviet dictator claimed to be concerned about the security of Leningrad, situated just 32 kilometers from the Finnish border on the Karelian Isthmus. In reality, secret protocols within the Molotov-Ribbentrop Pact, signed with Nazi Germany in August 1939, had already designated Finland as falling within the Soviet sphere of influence. Stalin expected the tiny Nordic nation to capitulate to his demands, just as Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania had done. He fatally underestimated Finnish resolve. Throughout the autumn of 1939, Soviet diplomats presented increasingly aggressive demands to Finnish negotiators in Moscow. They wanted the border on the Karelian Isthmus moved westward, bringing it within just 30 kilometers of Viipuri, Finland's second-largest city. They demanded islands in the Gulf of Finland, a 30-year lease on the Hanko Peninsula for a naval base, and the destruction of all Finnish fortifications on the isthmus. In exchange, they offered a larger but far less valuable tract of wilderness in eastern Karelia. Finnish negotiators, led by Juho Kusti Paasikivi, recognized these demands for what they were: the first step toward total absorption into the Soviet Empire. They refused. Stalin, confident that his massive Red Army would crush Finnish resistance within days, ordered preparations for invasion. Dmitri Shostakovich was commissioned to compose a celebratory piece of music, the suite on Finnish themes, intended to be performed as Soviet military bands paraded through a conquered Helsinki. The deadline for Finnish capitulation was set for December 21st, Stalin's 60th birthday. What Stalin did not know, or perhaps chose to ignore, was that his own paranoid purges had gutted the Red Army of its most capable leaders. Between 1937 and 1938, during the Great Purge, approximately 35,000 officers had been removed from command. 3 of 5 marshals were executed. 13 of 15 army commanders were shot. 50 of 57 corps commanders disappeared into the Gulag or faced firing squads. The military theorist Mikhail Tukhachevsky, who had pioneered innovative doctrines of deep operations and mechanized warfare, was tortured into a false confession and executed. In his place rose a generation of politically reliable but militarily incompetent officers, men who owed their positions to ideological purity rather than battlefield experience. Fear paralyzed decision-making at every level of command. Officers were terrified of showing initiative, knowing that any deviation from orders could result in accusations of sabotage or treason. This institutional rot would prove catastrophic when the Red Army finally rolled across the Finnish border. On November 30th, 1939, without a formal declaration of war, Soviet forces launched their invasion of Finland. The pretext was a fabricated incident at the village of Mainila, where Soviet shells had landed and killed Soviet soldiers. Moscow blamed Finnish artillery, demanding an apology and withdrawal of Finnish forces from the border region. Helsinki refused, recognizing the false flag operation for what it was. That same day, Soviet bombers appeared over Helsinki, dropping their deadly cargo on civilian areas. Foreign Minister Vyacheslav Molotov announced on radio that the planes were dropping food supplies to hungry Finns, not bombs. Finnish dark humor transformed this lie into a lasting symbol of resistance. The improvised gasoline bombs they hurled at Soviet tanks became known as Molotov cocktails, a drink to accompany the foreign minister's food parcels. The Soviet invasion force was staggering in its scale. Nearly 500,000 troops crossed into Finnish territory, organized into multiple armies attacking on several fronts. The 7th and 13th Armies pushed up the Karelian Isthmus toward Viipuri. The 8th Army attacked north of Lake Ladoga toward Tolvajärvi and Kolar. The Ninth Army advanced through the wilderness of central Finland, attempting to cut the country in two by reaching the Gulf of Bothnia at Oulu. The 14th Army struck at Petsamo in the far north. Supporting this massive force were approximately 2,500 tanks and over 1,000 aircraft. Against this avalanche of men and machines, Finland could muster perhaps 300,000 soldiers, most of them reservists called up from farms and factories. The Finnish Air Force possessed fewer than 100 modern aircraft. Tanks numbered in the dozens. On paper, the contest was hopeless. Western military analysts expected Finland to collapse within weeks, perhaps days. But paper calculations failed to account for factors that would prove decisive in the frozen forests of Finland. The Soviet army, hastily assembled and poorly supplied, was utterly unprepared for winter warfare in subarctic conditions. Many units had been transferred from Ukraine or other temperate regions of the Soviet Union. Their soldiers lacked proper winter clothing, their vehicles were not winterized, and their tactics were designed for open terrain rather than dense forest. Most critically, they lacked skis, forcing them to advance along the few available roads, while Finnish troops moved freely across country through snow that reached depths of 2 meters in places. The winter of 1939 to 1940 was one of the coldest on record, with temperatures regularly plunging below -40°C. Soviet soldiers froze to death in their trenches. Tank engines seized in the bitter cold. Frostbite claimed as many casualties as Finnish bullets. The Finnish defenders, by contrast, were fighting on their home ground. They knew every forest path, every frozen lake, every ridge and hollow that might provide cover or concealment. Most were experienced skiers who had spent their lives navigating the harsh Finnish winter. Their white winter camouflage rendered them nearly invisible against the snow, while Soviet troops in dark brown uniforms stood out like targets at a shooting range. Finnish tactics emphasized mobility, initiative, and the expert use of terrain. Small units would infiltrate behind Soviet columns, cut their supply lines, and then vanish into the forest before the enemy could respond. This hit-and-run warfare became known as Motti tactics, named after the Finnish word for a cubic meter of firewood. Finnish forces would encircle Soviet units strung out along roads, cutting them into isolated pockets like logs ready for splitting, then systematically destroying them. It was into this frozen hell that Simo Häyhä marched in late November 1939. He was 34 years old, a quiet farmer who had spent the past decade working his family's land and honing his marksmanship in Civil Guard competitions. Now he was assigned to the 6th Company of Infantry Regiment 34, known as JR-34, under the command of Lieutenant Arne Juutalainen, a battle-hardened officer who would himself become a legend of the Winter War with the nickname Terror of Morocco. The regiment was deployed to the Kolar sector, north of Lake Ladoga, where Finnish forces faced elements of the Soviet 8th Army. This would become one of the most bitterly contested fronts of the entire war, a narrow strip of frozen ground that the Finns held against overwhelming odds for the entire duration of the conflict. When Major General Waldemar Hägglund asked whether Kolar could hold, Juutalainen reportedly replied that it would hold unless ordered to retreat. The phrase Kolar kestää, Kolar holds, became a rallying cry of Finnish resistance. Häyhä arrived at the front carrying his personal Civil Guard rifle, an early series Seiko M28/30, with the serial number 35281 and Civil Guard number S 60974. This weapon, a Finnish variant of the Russian Mosin Nagant, represented the culmination of decades of Finnish firearms development. When Finland gained independence in 1917, the new nation found itself with a stockpile of approximately 190,000 Russian M91 Mosin Nagant rifles. Rather than replace these weapons entirely, Finnish gunsmiths had embarked on an ambitious program of improvement and refinement. The M28/30, produced by the Civil Guard workshop known as Seiko, featured a heavier, more accurate barrel manufactured to exacting standards. The stock was crafted from Arctic birch, a wood resistant to warping in extreme cold. An aluminum bushing between the barrel and forend improved accuracy by allowing the barrel to float freely. The rear sight had been completely redesigned for better precision, and the front sight featured distinctive protective ears that reminded Finnish soldiers of a Spitz dog, earning the rifle the affectionate nickname Pistikorva, or pointed ear. Most significantly for a marksman of Häyhä's caliber, the M28/30 featured an exceptionally refined trigger. While most military rifles of the era had heavy, gritty trigger pulls designed to prevent accidental discharges by nervous soldiers, the Finnish gunsmiths had crafted a trigger that broke crisply at around 4 pounds, with minimal creep and a coiled spring to smooth the action. Combined with the weapon's inherent accuracy, this made the M28/30 one of the finest military rifles ever produced, a tool perfectly suited to the kind of precision shooting at which Häyhä excelled. The rifle was chambered in the Finnish 7.6 2x53R cartridge, virtually identical to the Russian 7.6 2x54R but loaded to Finnish specifications for optimal performance. When Häyhä needed to engage multiple targets at close range, he carried a Suomi KP divided by -31 submachine gun, a 9mm weapon renowned for its reliability and accuracy, though kills made with this weapon were tracked separately from his sniper tally. What set Häyhä apart from other skilled marksmen was not merely his accuracy but his methodology. Unlike most snipers of his era, he refused to use telescopic sights on his rifle. This decision, often misunderstood by those unfamiliar with the realities of winter warfare, was based on hard practical considerations. A telescopic sight required the shooter to raise his head several centimeters higher than iron sights demanded, presenting a larger target to enemy counter-snipers. The glass lenses of a scope could reflect sunlight, betraying a sniper's position to observant enemies. In the extreme cold of the Finnish winter, scopes had an alarming tendency to fog up, becoming useless at the moment they were needed most. Additionally, Häyhä had spent his entire life shooting with iron sights and saw no reason to change a system that worked perfectly well. His issued M28/30 had no provisions for mounting a scope, and he preferred to keep it that way. The routine Häyhä established on the Kolar front was as methodical as it was deadly. Each day he would move into position before dawn, settling into a carefully prepared snow pit that rendered him essentially invisible against the white landscape. He packed dense mounds of snow in front of his firing position to provide a stable rest for his rifle and, crucially, to prevent the characteristic puff of disturbed snow that normally accompanied a muzzle blast in winter conditions. His white camouflage suit blended seamlessly with his surroundings. He kept snow in his mouth while shooting, preventing the visible plume of condensed breath that would have betrayed his position in the frigid air. Dressed in multiple layers of wool, he carried sugar cubes and bread in his pockets, consuming them throughout the long hours of immobility to generate body heat through caloric expenditure. His slight stature, often seen as a disadvantage, proved beneficial in disguising his position within the snow. And then he waited. For hours, sometimes from before dawn until after dusk, Häyhä lay motionless in the snow, watching the distant tree line for any sign of movement. The Soviet troops opposing Finnish forces in the Kolar sector wore dark brown uniforms that stood out starkly against the white landscape. They had not been issued winter camouflage for most of the war, making them easy targets for Finnish snipers. When a Soviet soldier entered his killing zone, Häyhä would slowly adjust his aim, accounting for distance, wind, and the extreme cold that affected bullet trajectory. Then, with the patience he had developed over decades of hunting in these same forests, he would squeeze the trigger. The crack of his rifle would echo across the frozen landscape, and another Soviet soldier would fall. Before the enemy could react, before they could determine where the shot had originated, Häyhä would already be shifting position, disappearing into the snow like a ghost. The kill count mounted with terrifying speed. On December 21, 1939, Häyhä achieved his single highest daily total, 25 confirmed kills in one day. Consider the logistics of this achievement. Winter daylight in northern Finland lasts only a few hours, perhaps 6 or 7 at most. To kill 25 enemy soldiers with a bolt-action rifle, where each shot must be followed by manual cycling of the bolt, and each 5-round magazine must be reloaded by hand, requires extraordinary efficiency. It means finding targets, aiming, firing, working the bolt, acquiring a new target, and repeating, all while remaining invisible to an increasingly desperate enemy searching for the source of their devastation. It means never missing, because a miss alerts the enemy and may draw return fire. It means functioning at peak performance in temperatures that would incapacitate most human beings. When asked in later years how he had become such an effective sniper, Häyhä's answer was characteristically modest: practice. Soviet commanders quickly became aware that something extraordinary was happening in the Kolar sector. Reports filtered back of entire squads being decimated by an unseen shooter. Soldiers who ventured into the open fell without warning, struck down by an enemy they never saw. The psychological impact was devastating. Soviet troops began referring to the mysterious Finnish sniper as the White Death, a spectral figure who seemed to materialize from the snow itself, deal death with supernatural precision, and then vanish without a trace. Some accounts suggest the name Belaya Smert may have originally referred to the deadly frost of the Finnish winter rather than any individual sniper. But Finnish propaganda quickly claimed the nickname for Häyhä, transforming him into a symbol of national resistance. His image appeared in newspapers throughout Finland, bolstering civilian morale during the darkest days of the war. The Soviet response was predictable but ineffective. Counter-sniper teams were dispatched to locate and eliminate Häyhä. They failed. Artillery barrages were called down on suspected sniper positions, churning the frozen earth and stripping branches from trees, but somehow never finding the small man hidden beneath the snow. Häyhä had spent his life in these forests. He knew every fold of terrain, every concealed approach, every escape route through the dense timber. He moved at times when the enemy did not expect movement, settled into positions they could not identify, and melted away before they could respond. The failed attempts to kill him only added to his legend, confirming in Finnish minds and Soviet fears that the White Death was somehow invincible. Meanwhile, the broader battle for Kolar raged with undiminished fury. The Soviet 56th and 164th Rifle Divisions hurled themselves against Finnish positions again and again, supported later by the 24th Motorized Cavalry and 128th Infantry. Finnish defenders, outnumbered by ratios exceeding 4-1, fought from improvised positions along ridges barely 10 meters high that paralleled the frozen Kolar River. The soil was frozen so deeply that digging proper fortifications was nearly impossible. Artillery was scarce, with Finnish gunners limited to perhaps 1,000 rounds per day compared to the estimated 40,000 shells the Soviets could fire. At one defensive position known as Killer Hill, 32 fortified Finnish soldiers held off an entire Soviet regiment, killing 400 attackers while losing 28 of their own. Such desperate stands became commonplace along the Kolar front. The conditions under which both sides fought defied imagination. Temperatures that plunged to -40 degrees turned the simple act of touching metal with bare skin into an invitation to frostbite. Weapons froze solid if not properly maintained. Food became rock-hard and had to be thawed before it could be eaten. Wounded men left exposed to the elements died within minutes. Soviet prisoners captured by Finnish forces often wept with gratitude at receiving hot food and warm shelter, conditions their own army had failed to provide. Finnish soldiers developed their own rituals of survival, rotating through frontline positions to prevent complete exhaustion, maintaining the field saunas that became legendary sources of morale and sanitation, sharing the bitter cold of the trenches with a stoic determination that amazed foreign observers. Throughout January and February 1940, Häyhä continued his deadly work. His confirmed kill count climbed past 200, then 300, then 400. Finnish military chaplain Antti Rantamaa kept careful records in his diary, documenting 259 confirmed kills by rifle and an additional approximately equal number by submachine gun by early March. Division Commander Colonel Antero Svensson credited Häyhä with 219 rifle kills when presenting him with an honorary rifle on February 17, 1940. The exact number varied depending on the source and the counting methodology, but all agreed that Häyhä had achieved something unprecedented in military history. On that same day, February 17th, 80 days after the Soviet invasion began, the Finnish government officially proclaimed him a hero of Finland. He was awarded the first and second-class Medals of Liberty, as well as the third and fourth-class Crosses of Liberty. The latter two decorations were normally reserved for commissioned officers, but Häyhä's achievements transcended conventional military hierarchy. The honorary rifle presented to Häyhä that February day was a custom-built Seiko M28 over 30 bearing serial number 100,781, donated by Eugen Johansson, a Swedish businessman and supporter of Finland. It was a magnificent weapon. crafted to the highest standards Finnish gunsmiths could achieve. A fitting tribute to the man who had done more than any individual soldier to blunt the Soviet assault. Häyhä would have little opportunity to use his new rifle. The end, both of the war and of his combat career, was approaching with cruel irony. By early March 1940, the military situation had turned inexorably against Finland. The Soviets had learned from their initial disasters, replacing incompetent commanders and bringing overwhelming force to bear on the Karelian Isthmus. Marshal Semyon Timoshenko, a veteran of the Russian Civil War who had survived the purges, took command on January 7th and imposed brutal discipline on the chaotic Soviet forces. Massive artillery bombardments, among the heaviest since the First World War, pounded Finnish fortifications on the Mannerheim Line. Fresh divisions, properly equipped for winter warfare, replaced the shattered remnants of the initial invasion force. Despite Finnish resistance that continued to inflict disproportionate casualties, the defenders were being ground down by attrition they could not sustain. Ammunition was running low. Reinforcements were exhausted. The promised aid from Britain and France had never materialized in meaningful quantities. Finnish political leaders began secret negotiations for peace. On March 6, 1940, just 1 week before the war would officially end, Simo Häyhä was participating in a counterattack against Soviet forces that had pushed through Finnish lines near Ulismainen, south of the Kolar front. He was serving as a squad leader, carrying his Suomi submachine gun rather than his sniper rifle. Somewhere across the frozen battlefield, a Soviet soldier spotted him. Perhaps it was a counter-sniper who had finally gotten lucky after months of failed attempts. Perhaps it was simply a Red Army rifleman who managed to draw a bead on a figure in white moving across the snow. The weapon used was loaded with explosive ammunition, bullets designed to fragment upon impact and cause maximum tissue damage. The shot struck Häyhä in the lower left jaw. The explosive bullet tore through his face, shattering bone and ripping away flesh. His upper jaw was destroyed. Most of his lower jaw was blown away. His left cheek was obliterated. The damage was so severe that soldiers who found him on the battlefield initially believed he was dead. His body was placed among a pile of corpses awaiting burial. Only when a fellow soldier, searching for Häyhä on orders from his commanding officer, noticed a leg twitching among the dead did anyone realize the White Death still lived. Fellow soldiers who evacuated him from the field would later report that half his face was missing. Rumors of his death spread throughout Finland and the Soviet Union. The legend of the White Death, it seemed, had ended in the same frozen wilderness where it had been born. But Simo Häyhä refused to die. Evacuated to a military hospital, he lay in a coma for 7 days while surgeons fought to save his life. He regained consciousness on March 13, 1940, the same day that the Moscow Peace Treaty was signed, ending the Winter War. Reading a newspaper in his hospital bed, he discovered reports of his own death and sent a letter to correct the misunderstanding. Recovery would take 14 agonizing months and require more than 26 surgical procedures. His face remained permanently disfigured, a lasting reminder of the price he had paid for his country's freedom. When the Continuation War broke out in 1941, Häyhä requested permission to return to the front lines. His request was denied. His war was over. The Winter War ended in what military historians have called a Pyrrhic victory for the Soviet Union. Finland was forced to cede approximately 11% of its territory, including much of Karelia and the city of Viipuri. Häyhä's own family farm fell within the ceded territory, forcing him to begin his life over in Valkjärvi, Ruokolahti, a small municipality in southeastern Finland. Yet Finland retained its independence, the goal for which so many had sacrificed so much. The cost to the Soviet Union had been staggering. Official Soviet figures, almost certainly underestimated, acknowledged 126,000 dead or missing. Western historians believe the true number may have exceeded 200,000, possibly approaching 250,000. The Red Army had suffered losses that exposed the catastrophic effects of Stalin's purges to the entire world. Adolf Hitler, watching from Berlin, concluded that the Soviet military was a paper tiger that would collapse under German assault. This fatal miscalculation would lead directly to Operation Barbarossa and the deaths of tens of millions. For Simo Häyhä, the post-war years brought a return to the quiet life he had always preferred. The Finnish government provided him a farm in Ruokolahti, where he raised crops, bred dogs, and hunted moose in the forests he loved. He became a successful competitive hunter, occasionally participating in hunting parties with Finnish President Urho Kekkonen. He served as a long-time board member of the Kolar Fighters Brotherhood, maintaining connections with the men who had shared those terrible winter months. Yet he rarely spoke of his wartime experiences and never boasted of his achievements. Neighbors knew him as a quiet, peaceful man who loved nature and was often seen walking with his hunting dog, Killer. The disfigurement from his wound remained visible, a map of violence carved into his features, but he bore it without complaint. In his later years, Häyhä became something of a reluctant celebrity, sought out by military historians, journalists, and firearms enthusiasts eager to understand the secrets of his success. His answers were invariably modest. When asked in 1998 how he had become such an effective sniper, he replied with a single word: practice. In an Independence Day interview with Helsingin Sanomat in December 2001, shortly before his 96th birthday, journalists asked if he felt remorse for killing so many people. His response encapsulated both his character and the spirit of Finnish resistance during the Winter War. He answered that he did what he was told to do, as well as he could. There would be no Finland, he said, unless everyone else had done the same. The question of exactly how many Soviet soldiers fell to Häyhä's rifle has been debated by historians ever since the war ended. Different sources cite different numbers: 219, 250, 9, 505, 542. The variation reflects the chaotic conditions of combat, the difficulty of confirming kills when bodies often lay in no man's land, and the use of Häyhä's achievements as propaganda by both Finnish authorities eager to boost morale and Western journalists fascinated by the story. In his private war memoir, Sotamuistoja, written in 1940 just months after his wounding and discovered in 2017, Häyhä himself estimated that he shot around 500 Soviet soldiers. He called this tally his sin list. Whatever the exact number, all sources agree that Häyhä achieved more confirmed sniper kills than any other individual in any major war, a record that stands unmatched more than 8 decades later. The story of Simo Häyhä resonates far beyond the frozen forests of Finland because it embodies universal themes of courage, resilience, and the power of the individual against overwhelming odds. Here was a man who asked for nothing more than to live quietly on his farm, who was thrust into a war not of his making, and who responded by becoming the most effective soldier of his kind in recorded history. He did so not through technological superiority, but through the application of fundamental skills honed over a lifetime: patience, marksmanship, knowledge of terrain, and an unshakable will to defend his homeland. He faced counter-snipers, artillery barrages, and the full might of the Soviet war machine, yet continued his deadly work until an enemy bullet finally found its mark. The tactical lessons of Häyhä's success influenced military doctrine for generations. His preference for iron sights over telescopic optics demonstrated that advanced technology is not always superior in specific combat environments. His emphasis on concealment, patience, and minimal movement showed that a sniper's survival depends as much on not being seen as on accurate shooting. His ability to function in extreme cold for extended periods highlighted the importance of proper clothing, nutrition, and psychological conditioning for winter warfare. Military academies around the world continue to study his methods, extracting principles applicable to modern conflicts in environments ranging from mountain warfare to urban combat. Yet the deeper significance of Häyhä's story lies in what it reveals about human potential and the nature of resistance against tyranny. Finland faced annihilation in the winter of 1939. A totalitarian superpower with seemingly unlimited resources had decided that Finnish independence was an inconvenience to be eliminated. The world expected surrender. Instead, a nation of 4 million people chose to fight, accepting losses they could not replace, enduring suffering that beggared description, and ultimately preserving their freedom through sheer determination. Simo Häyhä became the symbol of that resistance, a single man whose actions demonstrated that individuals can matter, that skill and courage can overcome numerical superiority, that the human spirit can triumph even in the darkest circumstances. Simo Häyhä spent his final years in a war veterans nursing home in Hamina, Finland. He died on April 1, 2002, at the age of 96. He was buried in his adopted hometown of Ruokolahti, in the church graveyard, beneath a simple stone bearing the words that had guided his life: home, religion, fatherland. The forests where he hunted as a boy, where he honed the skills that would make him legend, where he fought and nearly died for Finnish independence, still stand today, much as they did more than 8 decades ago. In winter, snow blankets the landscape in white silence, and the temperature drops toward the extremes that once defined the battleground of the Winter War. Somewhere in those forests, in the Kolar sector where Finnish and Soviet forces clashed with such terrible fury, the ghosts of that conflict still seem to linger, and among them, perhaps, moves the quiet shade of a small farmer who became the deadliest sniper the world has ever known. The museum dedicated to Häyhä and the Battle of Kolar stands today in the village of Mietilä at Rautjärvi, housed in a former infirmary. Opened in 1983, it preserves artifacts from the Winter War and features a permanent exhibition dedicated to the life of the man Soviet soldiers called the White Death. His original rifle, the Seiko M28/30 with which he achieved most of his confirmed kills, was donated to the Karelia Jaeger Battalion's Heritage Room and later transferred to the Finnish Military Museum's collection. There it remains, a simple bolt-action rifle with iron sights, no different in appearance from thousands of others produced in Finnish workshops during the 1930s. Yet this particular weapon, in the hands of this particular man, changed the course of history in ways that continue to resonate today. When we consider the legacy of Simo Häyhä, we must resist the temptation to glorify war or violence. Häyhä himself never celebrated his kills or sought recognition for the lives he took. He understood, as all combat veterans understand, that war is a terrible business that destroys bodies and souls alike. The young Soviet soldiers who died in the frozen forests of Finland were not villains but victims, conscripts sent by a ruthless dictator to fight a war that served Stalin's ambitions rather than Russian interests. Many of them were barely out of their teens, ill-equipped and poorly led, doomed by the incompetence of their commanders and the impossible circumstances of their deployment. Their deaths were tragic, not glorious, and Häyhä's skill as a killer does not diminish the human cost of what occurred along the Kolar River in those terrible winter months. What Häyhä's story does teach us is the power of preparation, discipline, and unwavering commitment to a cause greater than oneself. He did not become the deadliest sniper in history through luck or natural talent alone, but through decades of deliberate practice that made excellence automatic. He did not survive the Winter War through recklessness, but through careful methodology that minimized risk while maximizing effectiveness. He did not defend Finland for glory or recognition, but because it was his home, his people, his nation, and he would not surrender them without a fight. In an age when technology often overshadows human agency, when algorithms and autonomous systems promise to transform warfare beyond recognition, the story of Simo,